part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
The 1-1 pitch. A swing and a drive to deep right. Away back. Goal!
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of this year's version of the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. I'm your host, John Telich. And what a start to the season for the Guardians as they went out west and took 3 of 4 from the Seattle Mariners. And as we record this opening, they've played 5 games. They are 4-1 after the great job in Seattle and then the first contest of the Oakland affair out there on the West Coast. So the current record at 4-1. Let's recap that opener. Shane Bieber on the hill for the Guardians on March the 30th, but they lose 3-0. Karinchak had a difficult time during his stint on the hill. We, of course, wondered how the pitch clock would affect him. Everybody universally in baseball thought, well, that guy in Cleveland's going to have some problems, and he really did. He had a pitch clock violation. Then he hit a batter. He walked people. He had a rough outing, and bottom line is the Mariners would get a 3-run shot late in the affair. That would be enough to pick up the victory. They win by a 3-0 count as the Guardians go to 0-1 on the year. Shane Bieber, though, looked like Cy Young, his first appearance on the hill for the season, 4th year in a row that he is the starting opening day pitcher for the Indians/Guardians. He went 6 innings, gave up 6 hits, and he struck out 3. He looked really, really good on the hill for the first time around this season. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear from Mike Zunino talking to Andre Knott of Bally Sports after the game.
Yeah, catching Bieber, just what did you think of how he was able to kind of navigate through the 6th inning?
Yeah, it's a tough lineup. It's one of those things we had to try to mix up how we were attacking him as we went along. We were able to use some spin throughout and relied on a lot. They did a good job adjusting, but I think Beavs did a good job settling in, being able to keep them off balance throughout. He worked out of some big jams there.
So with the loss, the Guardians at 0-1, but game 2 looked like Guardians baseball we saw all of last year. Very aggressive, slapping the ball all around the yard, running the base paths with authority, playing some solid defense, and it all added up to a 9-4 victory for the Guardians. And the big star of that contest was Steven Kwan, who drove in 5. Hunter Gaddis started, went just 3 2/3 innings. He had a rough go of it, but 4 runs allowed. Of course, we all know the adjustment that the Guardians had to make. They had Gaddis starting in game 2 because of the Tristan situation, the Tristan McKenzie coming down with that problem with the muscle in his back, if you will, his shoulder and his back. So he's on the shelf for some time. Gaddis had the emergency start, if you will, and the bullpen was outstanding in this affair as they really cleaned things up after Gaddis had the rough start. The Guardians with 13 hits on the night, and in that affair, as I mentioned, Kwan with 5 RBIs. And let's listen here as Rick Manning, Matt Underwood and company show you and talk about what a great night Steven Kwan had on the plate.
Again, the 3-2. Shoots it toward left. Fair ball! Jimenez will score and Straw's right on his heels. On his way to second, Kwan is in there with a 2-run double, and he'll hold at second base when the ball gets away.
He hits the ball softly, and I'll tell you what, it always finds a hole. And it turns into a double, and he drives in a pair, so he has 3 ribbies now.
In the 3-2. Line drive, base hit left field. Jimenez scores. Here comes Zano. And the throw to the plate is cut off. A night for Kwan.
Absolutely, what a night for Steven Kwan. 5 RBIs on the evening, and the good guys picking up the victory. So the record even at 1 apiece through the first 2 contests of the season. Now, Game 3 came on April the Fools, and the fooling was done by the pitching staff of the Guardians. Both Aaron Civale, Karinchak, and Clase, they got it done. A complete game, if you will, with Civale going the 7 innings, 2 hits, 3 strikeouts. He would be the man that would pick up the victory with his outstanding pitching. Then Karinchak atoned for the difficult time he had in the opener. He had an inning of pitching, struck out 2. Clase came, and he got the job done, picked up his first save of the season. And the only runs for the Guardians supplied by the long ball, Josh Naylor had a solo bomb, as did Andres Jimenez. So they pick up a 2-0 victory and start the season off with a 2-1 record. Let's go to Sunday. On that date, they won by a 6-5 count in 10 innings. It would be the first of 2 straight victories in extra innings for the good guys. De Los Santos would pick up the win on the hill for Cleveland. Zunino had a big night at the plate. He was 3 for 3, and he had 3 RBIs in that late afternoon affair out there in Seattle. But the story of the day was the youngster Tim Herron, the young left-hander drafted by Guardians back in the 2018 year in round 29, coming out of Indiana University. His first start on the hill, his major league debut, and he went into the record books. According to folks that keep these stats, this was the first time since 1893, they say, when the mound was moved to 60 feet 6 inches. The man would go up and face 4 batters in his major league debut and strike every one of them out. Outstanding job that he did as he came in the 5th inning in relief of Cal Quantrill, who had a bit of a rocky start for his first time on the hill. According to the stats makers, first time since 1901 to face 4+ batters in your major league debut and strike out all 4. So after 4, the Guardians with a 3-1 record and a win of a 6-5 count in 10 innings. So looking real good as they take 3 of 4 from the Seattle Mariners, and they move on Monday, April the 3rd, Monday night, a late night affair against the Oakland Athletics. Now, in Seattle, the crowds were outstanding, sellouts on a couple of times, and they were raucous. They really got into the game. And then there was the situation in Oakland on Monday night, very sparse crowd. The winds were whipping. It was 28-mile-an-hour winds, and Zach Plesac had a rough time in his first start of the season. Only won an inning and a third. He gave up 7 hits, 6 runs, and the good guys, however, would battle. They'd come back, then they'd give back the lead, then they'd take the lead, then they'd give it back. This game went into extras as well, and the Guardians post a 12-11 victory. So that's 2 straight games they won in extra innings. And Clase had his first blown save of the season. That happened pretty early in the season. You don't want to see that, but that was the case. But the hitting shoes were on for the Guardians with Jose Ramirez and Naylor each 3 for 5 on the night. Straw, Rosario, and Andres Jimenez had 2 hits apiece. They were really knocking the ball all around the yard as they pick up that 12-11 count in extra innings out there in Oakland. So they head into Tuesday's affair with a 4-1 record on the season. Well, this point of the season, and also in the podcast, we're going to bring in our guest for the day, and that is Bob DiBiasio. He is the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs. He's been with the Guardians and the Indians for hundreds of years, it seems like. Actually, it's 45. We will take a break here on the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast and then come back with Senior VP of Public Affairs of the Guardians, Mr. Bob DiBiasio. We'll catch you in just a couple.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tyrus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tyrus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Welcoming in now, big shot, Cleveland Guardians, Bobby DiBiasio. Bobby, you've been with this club for so many years and so many different iterations. You had that short little stint down in Atlanta. Take us back to just when you began with the ball club and the challenges that were with ownership back then. They were kind of like the salad days of the Cleveland Indians back then.
Well, JT, thanks for having me. Year number 45 in Major League Baseball here in 2023, 44 with my beloved Cleveland Indians / Guardians. When I was a freshman in college, John, I had this dream of being the PR guy for the Cleveland Indians. We'd sit around the fraternity house at Ohio Wesleyan and we would talk about what in the heck we were going to do with our lives. And guys would say, well, I'm going to be an attorney, or my father's a dentist, so I'm going to be a dentist and take over the family business at some point, or I'm going to be a teacher and a coach. I want to own my own business. And they'd get to me and I'm going to be the PR man of the Cleveland Indians. They all looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, what the hell got into you? How do you go about doing that? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but I need to study it. So I did. I studied PR professionals in the sports world, in the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball. And it was a track where back in the 70s, there wasn't the sports management curriculum that is so common today. There was none of that. Ohio U was just beginning their sports management master's degree. There were a couple colleges that offered that. But mostly it was a fraternity back then. Thankfully, it is not now. It's obviously much more diverse in its hiring and application. But back then, it was all former sports writers who late in their career ended up being PR people. And here in Cleveland, it was Harry Jones, who was the PR man for the Cleveland Indians. And for those who may not know, Harry was a legendary writer for the Plain Dealer covering the Cleveland Indians. And then he did Fox 8, well, back then, WJW, yep. TV 8 with Mudcat Grant, Indians games on television. And then he, late in his career, he became the PR man. So I wrote Harry letter upon letter throughout college saying, someday I want to work for you, or someday I want to take your job, whatever, to get a response, because in 4 years, never heard from him. Wrote many letters. Wow. Went to graduate school at Ohio State, got my master's in journalism, and wrote and told him that, and then became a sports writer real briefly in Fremont, Ohio for the Fremont News Messenger, and wrote him and told him I'd love to get credentials now that I'm a member of the media. And all of a sudden one day, and sitting in my upstairs of a double in a house in Fremont, Ohio, getting ready on a Friday to cover a Gibsonburg-Clyde basketball game, Harry Jones calls and said, are you still interested in working for us? And I was overwhelmed and ended up having an interview with him. And the interview lasted maybe 10, 15 minutes. And he and Joe Bick, Joe Bick was in the PR department, who was being promoted to assistant to the president, Gabe Paul, which had created the opening. And after 10, 15 minutes, he asked me to go out in the hall, and I'm thinking, oh my, my dream, only got 10, 15 minutes to sell myself.
At least I got in the building.
Yeah, I'm in the building at least. And a couple minutes later, Harry comes out of the office and into the hallway and extends his hand and says, hey, kid, welcome to the big leagues. And that was,
we're paying you next to nothing.
Yeah, well, $11,000. I don't mind sharing that.
All right.
I made $11,000.
This was 79?
This was February of 1979. And then worked through June of '86 when Mr. O'Neill passed away, and Peter Bavasi came in as a consultant and fired a few people,
Sure.
me included. So the '87 season, I was the PR chief for the Atlanta Braves, worked for Ted Turner. Hall of Famer Bobby Cox was the general manager, one of the greatest guys in the world, plus Chuck Tanner, the manager, phenomenal human being. Really wonderful experience, but it wasn't home.
Yeah.
And so when Dick Jacobs bought the team and hired Hank Peters to be the president of the franchise, and I had known Hank when he was president of the Orioles, called and asked if I wanted to come home. And obviously my wife and I, our daughter Julie was born during the 1987 baseball season. And to get back home, the one thing I always share, and not to make this story too long, but Bobby Cox comes walking into my office and said, "Why would Hank Peters be calling me about you?" And I said, "You guys don't have a big trade going on? You're worried about me?" And he goes, "No, really. What's he calling? You're not happy here?" Or, obviously he's calling to see if he could talk to you. And I said, "Well, sir, there's lots of changes going on back up at my old ball club, my hometown. And if you would be kind enough to give him permission to talk to me, I would appreciate it. If he does offer me a job, I think I would go because it's home."
Yeah.
And he turns to me and he goes, "What will it take to keep you?" And I looked up at him and said, "Bobby, that question will never, ever be asked of me again the rest of my life. I do not believe. And the only time that question is going to be asked of me, the answer is nothing. You're not home."
Yeah.
And while PR-wise, the Braves job probably better just because of TBS and CNN.
It's a big deal then.
All the things that are involved in the, at that time with Ted Turner and being the media mogul he was, we worked on the Goodwill games, all of those kind of things, but it wasn't home.
Yeah.
So long story to just say I'm very blessed. For those of us in this business who get to do this for the team that we love, that we grew up with, that the history of the franchise is embedded into our souls since we were born, it's incredibly special.
It is. It is cool being a Cleveland kid to be able to have covered sports.
Just like you.
Just like me. Very, very fortunate. Now, you mentioned, of course, the days when the post-Bavasi years, the late 80s, early 90s, the rebirth of baseball here in Cleveland with the John Hart and company coming in and doing what they did to new ballpark, all those types of things happening, kind of where we are today in the sense that you have this great, exciting, youngest team in baseball, and you don't have a new ballpark, you're getting a new and improved ballpark, already still one of the greatest parks in baseball. But they're kind of similar eras in some way, Bobby. How do you shepherd the PR aspect or just the goodwill of a franchise through something like the rebranding and then this young team that's playing on the field?
Well, there's no question. There's so many similarities as to the building of a baseball team. At the same time, we were building a ballpark. I will tell anybody that wants to get into a discussion about our long and rich history. This is the 123rd opening day coming up in our history as a member of the American League, established in 1901. Professional baseball has been in this town since 1869, just a few years after the end of the Civil War. We're one of the oldest institutions in this city. And the impact that professional baseball has made on this town is absolutely remarkable. It's woven into the fabric of who we are. It's in the DNA of the city of Cleveland. And as you go through the different eras, the 90s, and then currently, there's so many similarities to how you go about building a baseball team, constructing a sustained winning culture that Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff have just done so expertly with Tito at the helm and ownership of Paul Dolan, who creates that sustained winning culture here in our organization, believes in continuity and stability. And when I think back to Hank Peters and John Hart and Dan O'Dowd, how they were creating something from the ground up. And it always was interesting to us that this ballpark was being built from the ground up at the same time our team was. And there was something, that parallel path was just it's so exciting for everybody. Dick Jacobs being able to get Progressive Field, back then obviously Indians Park, first name ever,
first and foremost,
and then Jacobs Field, and then Progressive Field, could be the most significant act in our franchise history. I remember you were there, Fay Vincent, behind the batting cage, sitting in a golf cart, commissioner of baseball. 1989, comes to town and tells all the media that, hey, if this referendum for the Gateway Sports and Entertainment Complex doesn't happen, there's no guarantee Cleveland has a baseball team.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that the Denver Post and the Tampa Tribune both put telecopier machines and phone lines into my homes to send the news release to them immediately, because both those cities thought if the referendum failed that they were getting our baseball team. We obviously, a slim margin, 52-48, kept the team in town. This beautiful new ballpark has just revitalized the southern edge of downtown Cleveland, along with our partners next door, the Cavaliers. As we go about building a baseball team, the way John and Danny walked through just the issues of payroll. What kind of exciting team did they want to put on the field as we open this brand new building? And then with Chris and Cherney in the group and Tito, how do you sustain that? And the similarities are there. There's commonalities in approach. We disdain the arbitration process, so we try to sign the top quality young
You first have
athlete.
to identify that kid.
Right.
Yeah.
They have to show us that they can make a major league impact on the field, and then they have to have a willingness to listen to an offer. And then thirdly, they have to be committed and dedicated to this organization and our town. And so there's certain commonalities there that create a sustained winning culture.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, how tough was it last year prior to the season when there was all the talk about payroll, and yet there was the threat that your best player would not even, be with the team when his process went out? So you changed the name of the team, plus you have a season that's starting, and then your top player, perennial MVP candidate, decides to sign long term. Not necessarily out of the blue, but it certainly shocked a lot of people.
How about 180-degree difference last April could have been?
Yeah.
Think about it. Jose says no. We change our name, and there's all the angst involved in that for a very large group of our fans and supporters. Obviously, a certain demographic, older, who did not accept the change as readily. And then you go through with a young team, and the season could have gone south. But instead, Jose says, yes, April 5th was probably the turning point, the one-day turning point of, we all talked in the press box a lot about, when did this thing really turn to the positive? And we all would come back to April 5th when Jose said yes. And that just gave everybody an extra bounce to their step, that he committed to this team, that committed to him as a 16, 17-year-old kid. One of the best players in the game of baseball. I firmly believe Jose Ramirez is the best professional athlete in this town. There isn't another athlete in this town who has been in the MVP voting for their league
year after year.
Nobody but Jose. So that just put the extra bounce to our step as we were navigating a name change. And seeing which young athletes could make an impact at the big league level. I don't think there were, if you look at it truly baseball wise, John, doing what Chris and Cherney decided to do had to happen, because the prior 4 or 5 years, all we did was collect this incredible amount of young, awesome talent.
Yeah.
There's a time when you have to find out if they can play at the big league level, and there's only one way to do it, and that's to play them. And young players don't make a lot of money. So people were hung up on payroll, which didn't make any sense because they were not connecting the dots that we needed to find out about some talented young players. But the economic structure of the payroll, in partnership with the union, they don't make a lot in their first few years. So you've seen our payroll grow exponentially this year,
right,
because our players are a little older and we dabbled into the free agent market. We've had payrolls in the 60 million mark. We've had payrolls up over 150 million. It's all a product of the age of the team and where you think you are and winning it all and things of that nature. So unfortunately, there's too much sports talk nonsense about payroll, that people just don't understand the economic realities of the game of baseball, that there is a disparity in our business.
Right.
And the major markets can spend more than the middle market. It's not unique to Cleveland. So I would just add, if people wanted to learn about that, there's a couple stats that we would give out that are factual and I think important. One, under Tito, last 10 years, we have the 4th most wins in all of baseball, 2nd most in the American League. The Dodgers, the Yankees, St. Louis Cardinals, and us are the 4 winningest teams of the last decade. We've been to the postseason 6 times in the last decade. It doesn't mean we can't compete. It's just we have to be more efficient. We have to be more effective, smarter. And luckily, we have leaders that are smarter and more efficient and more effective. The other one is the Dolan ownership. I just want to share that 23 years they have been owners of this franchise, the longest tenured owners in the history of our franchise. They rank win-loss record 9th in baseball in the last 23 years, 5th in the American League. I would say that's pretty good. I'd say that you are making our fans, when we go to spring training, stand up and say, we have more often than not, we have a legitimate chance to win our division and go to play baseball in October. And certainly the last decade of their 2+ decade ownership. So I just wish people who have a microphone in front of them or have a laptop in front of them would study it a little bit better.
Very good. Let's talk about Mr. Jacobs. He, certainly one of the biggest figures in the history of sports here in our city, but a smart businessman. Yeah. I mean, I like to say he kind of rode the escalator all the way up to the top. Revenues were high,
yep,
and he spent high, and you guys performed on the field. And now it's just a different way of battling that inequity that is in Major League Baseball that the Dolans have to deal with.
Well, I think Mr. Jacobs, first and foremost, again, could be the most significant owner in franchise history because of this building. He was, because of what he did in downtown Cleveland, you look at this, the landscape, the skyscrapers across our town, they're him, majority of them. And so he was a very powerful guy, even though he wasn't really publicly known. So when his name popped up, those in the sports world were like, who is this guy? Because he wasn't involved.
The movers and shakers knew.
But everybody in town knew who Dick and Dave Jacobs were. And again, most significant owners, I think, in franchise history. When we opened this building and he was willing to not take the rent, the lease portion of suites, I'll explain. The owners in Baltimore, the owners in Chicago.
Those were new parks at the time.
Yep,
Camden
and
Yards,
Texas,
Comiskey.
the 4 of us.
Yep.
The 3 other owners, you had to lease a suite and then buy your tickets and your food and beverage. And that lease portion went into the pocket of the owners, not Dick Jacobs. His commitment to this city was that lease portion is going back into the construction costs to get this building done, to get this beautiful baseball-only ballpark done in our town. So he said no to a large bit of revenue because he wanted to get this done. He purchased the team out of civic duty. Somebody in Cleveland, when Mr. O'Neill passed away, had to step up and buy this ball club or it was going somewhere.
Sure.
I mean, there's stories Donald Trump, et cetera, had written letters to Gay Paul wanting to buy the team. He wasn't the only one. Dick Jacobs stood up and his brother Dave kept this team in our town and turned it over to a 5-generational Cleveland family and the Dolan family to keep this civic treasure here in Cleveland. So we were able to keep pace with the Yankees and other major market teams because we now had different revenue streams that we never had at Cleveland Stadium, being a tenant in that building. We are now the landlord of our own building, and therefore our revenue streams changed, and we could compete with the sale of suites and sold out crowds and things of that nature. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's getting new ballparks. So that one unique piece of the pie was no longer a unique piece of the pie for us revenue. Everybody was now getting those revenues. And then sports marketing, regional sports networks popped up. And now, we're getting just generally $50 million a year for cable television. Well, the Yankees and Dodgers and them are getting $200-300 million a year. So now the huge disparity in our game was created. And I think Dick, as a businessman, saw that and said, hey, I did my civic duty. Now it's time for me, especially when he heard that the Dolan family was interested in buying the Cincinnati Reds. And he said, oh, there's somebody here in town. And so he and Larry got together, and Larry, obviously, he was in on the bid to buy the Browns, wanted to buy a hometown team, but didn't realize that the Indians were available. And those two gentlemen, I'll never forget the ceremonial first pitch. Larry wanted Dick Jacobs to throw out the first pitch, and he wanted to catch it, being the old catcher at St. Ignatius High School that he was.
Yes, he was.
And Dick threw him a one-hopper, and Larry was able to backhand it and catch it. So, but Dick was remarkable in his civic duty, and then handed it off the baton to another generational Cleveland family.
Let's jump ahead to today now, Bobby. And, the home season is upon us. We're recording this on Tuesday. The Guardians are 4-1. They're playing real good baseball. They're playing the way they did a year ago, making it happen on various fronts. What can fans, look forward to, changes in the way games are constructed or put on this year here at the ballpark?
Pace of play.
Well, we know that, yes.
The rule changes are a big play in that. The pace of play, it's almost a misnomer. It's called a pitch clock. You could really call it a batter clock because once the pitcher receives the ball from the catcher with nobody on base, he has 15 seconds to deliver the ball. The batter, however, has to be in the batter's box, engaged, ready to hit with the pitcher at the 8-second mark. So the pitcher can wait till 1 second to deliver the pitch, but the batter has to be ready at 8 seconds. So it's almost a batter clock as much as a pitch clock. I think the pace of play, games being a half hour shorter than what they were. Do you come a little bit earlier to enjoy food and beverage and just the ambiance of the game is what we would ask people to do. Be a little smarter in your approach to the food and beverage because you don't want to miss a whole lot of innings because some innings are going by pretty quickly because of the pitch clock. Other than that, I think they're going to see a much better product. We took all the non-baseball stuff out of baseball, and I think Commissioner Manfred and his team, led by Theo Epstein, who was a part of this and running the competition committee. All of these rule changes had been in place in the minor leagues for a number of years. So the nuances got to be played out in front of managers, coaches, players, umpires, scouts, baseball people. So by the time it got to the big leagues, people were comfortable in implementing the changes with the no shift and, the pitch clock, et cetera, larger bases. So I think fans, first and foremost, they're going to come see a crisper, more fun product. Secondly, when they come to our facility, we're not going to do a whole lot of structural things, obviously, because we have a major renovation project coming that will be opening day on 2025. So we didn't invest in a lot of structural changes because there can be so many, couple $100 million renovation to a 30-year-old. I mean, it's 30 years now, JT. Think about that. Yeah. This is our 30th year in this building. So you really focus in on the food and beverage fun. I mean, there's something about going to a baseball game and you walk into the gates and you say, okay, what am I going to have today? I mean, I don't think when you walk into a football game or a basketball game, the first thing on your mind is, what am I going to eat? It's part of baseball, minor league baseball, major league baseball. It's part of the DNA of our sport. And so we have a whole lot of different new food items that our fans are going to love. And you can go to cleguardians.com to learn all about that, gate time openings, all the things that are important to fans. The one cool thing that we established this year, and kudos to our sales and marketing and ticket people, the $49 ballpark pass. What a remarkable deal, affordable deal. I can't imagine living downtown as a young couple or a single person and loving sports, especially baseball. For $49, you get an SRO ticket for the corner bar, left field drink rails, the Heritage Plaza out in center field. And you get every game the whole month, $49 a month. You can buy the whole season. You can buy 2 or 3 months of it. I just find that, and it's very popular. I have to tell you that
Is there a limit to how many?
Yeah, there is a limit to the SRO because there's only a certain number of people we can fit into this ballpark comfortably and be able to service properly. So there is a limit, so people need to jump on it. But it has been incredibly well received and embraced thus far.
Very nice. And, of course, any renovation work that's being done, it would be behind the scenes, or will it all be off, during the off season? How will you do this in order to get this done in 2 years without disrupting play?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some pardon our dust signs in various parts, but nothing that hopefully would stop us from playing host to a World Series at the end of October. But I do think that what I think I heard was 2 days, 3 days after the last out, all of us in this building have to get out and we'll work from home and satellite offices downtown for the whole calendar year of 2024, when they do not only the office building, but our clubhouse. Our players deserve, it's 30 years old. We've done some renovations down in there, but our players deserve the best resources possible. And so we're going to double the space of our already expansive clubhouse, but they deserve to have that attention. And our fans deserve a whole remix of reimagined upper deck, the new Terrace Club area, the right field, the cargo boxes are gone, are going to be gone. So those types of things. I'm so excited. When I sat back and was privy to the initial conversations with the designers, and I thought to myself, wow, I don't think anything could be as dramatic as moving from a 70,000 seat cavernous stadium to a beautiful urban baseball only 40,000 seat ballpark. But this is awfully close.
Going to be fun to see how that whole process unfolds for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's hop on one more before we let you go, Bobby. It's been a year, few months since you have changed. What's your research telling you about the Guardians and the acceptance and reluctance, I would assume, of some segments of your your baseball population?
Yeah, I think there's certain segments older that are slower to embrace it, fully expect it. You and I are in that category, not that we aren't fully accepting of it, but we're in that older demographic that we talk about. We're on the side, I think, that we were okay with it, even though it's been part of our DNA, since we were born. Younger fans have obviously gravitated towards it, embraced it, bought the paraphernalia, all the merchandise. Our sales, Guardians gear is off the charts. So it's been very popular. So, when we decided to do it, we could talk for another hour on the machinations of it all, the reasons behind it, but simply we felt it was the right thing to do.
Good way to end on it. Bobby D, as always, a pleasure, and we look forward to more conversations down the road.
Oh, love it. Thanks for having me, JT. Let's do it again.
Thanks very much to Bobby DiBiasio for the great visit and chat. We'll have him on later on in the season. So far in this baseball season, with 5 games into the books as we record this on a Tuesday, the Guardians standing at 4-1. Of course, looking ahead, as we mentioned, the home opener coming up on this Friday, April the 7th at 4:10 at Progressive Field, as the Mariners will be taking on the Guardians once again. That's a 4:10 game. Then Saturday at 6:10, then a 1:40 affair at Progressive Field to round out that 3-game series. After that series, it's the big boys in town, the Bronx Bombers. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, the Yankees here for a 6:10 game on Monday, ditto for Tuesday, and 1:10 afternoon matinee affair on Wednesday at Progressive Field. By the way, the Athletic has come out with their power rankings, and after the initial 4 to 5 games of the season, number 1 team in the league, according to their rankings, the Astros, but tied for 8th with the St. Louis Cardinals, are your Cleveland Guardians. And that's going to do it for this edition of episode number 2. The Guardians of the Land MLB podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm your host, John Telich. Thanks very much for listening. Thank you very much to Bobby DiBiasio for stopping by and having the chat about his history with the team, his love of Cleveland baseball, and he is still doing the dream job that he wanted when he was a young guy, to be the PR guy for the Cleveland baseball team in Major League Baseball. That's it for the show. We'll see you the next time around. And as always, please subscribe, rate, and review. And thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you the next time around on the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. We'll see you later.